Senator Ludlam.
Thank you very much, Madam Acting Deputy President. I rise to speak briefly on an issue that's very close to my heart and an issue that in many ways brought me into this chamber in the first place. The day before yesterday I woke up at Rockpool, which is about 20 kilometres from Wiluna in the northeast goldfields of Western Australia, to see off about 100 people who are taking part in the walk against uranium mining. And just the sheer logistics of getting 100 people to Wiluna in the first place was quite an extraordinary feat. A wonderful little camp in a really beautiful part of the world, only a couple of dozen kilometres from where Toro Energy plans on opening up effectively quite a shallow strip mine for uranium on the shores of Lake Way in Western Australia, a salt lake. This gathering plans to walk around 1,000 kilometres to Perth via Kalgoorlie over the next couple of months. They'll be arriving on the 28th or the 27th of October in Perth. And so they're on their way now. As I'm speaking in here, all the way across the country in Canberra, those walkers are on their way to Uliri, which some senators might know as a pastoral station just to the west of Leonora. So they're out there at the moment. They'll have made camp, and they are walking with determination that I think really embodies the anti-nuclear campaign that is now in its third generation. It started in 1945 with the explosions that lit up Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and those people now are carrying the work that has been done by those very first victims of the nuclear cycle, the hibakusha of those twin cities in Japan, and they're carrying the third, now their campaign in its third generation of hopes of people all around the world that we will close this nuclear cycle. They're not marching for safer uranium mining. They're not marching for slightly better regulation of the toxic industry. They are marching, and I'm in here to add my voice to theirs, to close this industry down once and for all. We know that the legacy of uranium mining absolutely will not be over and done with in my lifetime or in the lifetime of the children who come to visit us in the public gallery every day, because the toxic products of this industry and byproducts are deadly for so many hundreds of thousands of years. But we can play our part now to prevent more of these carcinogenic places from being exploited and opened up by the mining sector. And so this walk, run by Footprints for Peace, by Marcus and KA, good friends of mine, and their newborn little Shay, going on one of these walks that they have been doing for many, many years, that they've gone all around the world. We have guests from France who are campaigning against the French nuclear industry. We've got guests from Arizona who are bringing the Navajo experience, the devastating Navajo experience of uranium mining, and spreading that word here, and telling traditional owners in townships from Wiluna through Leonora, through Kalgoorlie, and then across the wheat belt to Perth, don't let them get started. It killed so many people in the southern and western states of the US and across Canada, again on Native American lands as it takes place on Aboriginal lands here in Australia. Don't let them start. Don't let them start, because the promises might sound good, but the reality is very, very different. Uranium is different to other forms of mining. This industry mines a carcinogen, and the residues that they leave behind cause cancer, just as surely as cigarettes do. The diseases take, in some cases, years or even decades to manifest, but they are no less real for that. They, on this extraordinarily courageous walk, will pass through communities throughout central Western Australia, and I wish them well, and I hope to join them. And I encourage other senators to spread the word and to join them as well on their epic walk into Perth against the nuclear industry. We in Western Australia are at the front end of the nuclear fuel chain, and our colleagues and friends and brothers and sisters in other parts of the world who might know very little about uranium mining and where the industry comes from know a great deal about the end products of the industry. And public opinion, which has flatlined the progress of the civil nuclear industry since the 1980s, when most countries simply stopped building these facilities, has turned sharply against the industry. The industry believes that this is simply a consequence of the Fukushima disaster on Japan's Pacific coast, but of course the roots run much deeper than that. Public opinion has reasserted itself in countries and places where public opinion is taken seriously. I can't provide you an opinion poll from China because I'm not even aware of such things are taken. But I can provide one courtesy of an article in the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists by M.V. Ramana, who provides links to the polls, and I'll just mention a couple. Support for civil nuclear power. This doesn't go into the weapons issue. In Chile, it's 12%, not a very popular industry in Chile, 16% in Thailand, 34% here in Australia, 35% in the United Kingdom, and 57% of French citizens want to abandon nuclear energy in France, which we're told is one of the pillars of the nuclear industry around the world. Between 41 and 54% of Japanese oppose nuclear energy, but many say that it's much higher, and I think the politics of nuclear energy in Japan will take some time to work through. In 2005, a poll showed 82% of Japanese favoured nuclear energy. The consequences of the horrific disaster in Tohoku, I think, has changed that, and it's changed it permanently, right up to the very highest levels of Japanese politics. The interest groups are still very well entrenched, the vested interests pushing the reprocessing and the civil nuclear power and the research side are still terribly well entrenched in Japan. But this is one of our major client countries, and public opinion there has shifted very, very quickly. In the middle of April, 17,000 people protested at 2 demonstrations in Tokyo. 60,000 people marched in demonstrations in Tokyo, Osaka, Hiroshima and Fukushima in June of this year. And in July of this year, Hidyankyo, the group that represents the 10,000 or so survivors of the atomic bombings in Japan, the first generation of Hibakshis, called for the very first time for the elimination of the civilian nuclear industry. In Germany, 60,000 people participated in a protest on the 12th of March, forming a 45-kilometre human chain from Stuttgart to the Neckarwestheim power plant in Germany. 110,000 people demonstrated in 450 other German towns on the 14th of March. This is a country that has intimate experience with the far end of the nuclear fuel chain that seems such a long way from Lake Way in the northeast goldfields of Western Australia, when they were showered with cesium, strontium, iodine and other toxic carcinogenic byproducts of the explosion at Chernobyl in 1986. On the 26th of March, 250,000 people demonstrated against nuclear energy in 4 cities in Germany. And so, of course, at the end of May, the German Chancellor announced the full phase-out of the German nuclear industry. In Switzerland, 20,000 people turned out, marching peacefully near the Besnau nuclear power plant, the oldest one in Switzerland. In Taiwan, 2,000 people are demanding an immediate halt to the construction of the 4th nuclear power plant in March of this year. In Russia, the environmental groups Eco-Defense and Groza risked a great deal by recently demonstrating in front of Rosatom. We don't hear a great deal about the Russian anti-nuclear movement here in Australia. And those are people who take risks that I couldn't even imagine to do the kind of work that I do here. People have been killed in Russia for expressing their views on the so-called peaceful nuclear industry and the extraordinary carnage that has been writ in the Russian and Eastern European populations by this industry. In India, last Wednesday, a hunger strike was held at the Kudankulam reactor, where a plant is currently under construction. I've had a bit to do with the Indian anti-nuclear movement over the last 12 years or so. They are amazingly inspiring, carrying, I think, the original intent of Gandhi's ahimsa into these campaigns against these appallingly misconceived and very, very dangerous projects in India. And in the United States, 24 groups in the United States launched a legal challenge to the US nuclear regulator to stall the extension of operation of ageing reactors. The industry is in such grave and serious trouble around the world because very few countries have been building these plants literally since the late 1970s, before the 3 Mile Island near disaster at which the evacuation of 1 million people was contemplated. It has bankrupted a generation of utilities and investors, and it will do so again. We have a different proposal, which is the orderly phase-out of this industry worldwide that has brought such misery in so many places. People have died in this struggle, from Karen Silkwood to Fernando Pereira, who died in 1985 when the Rainbow Warrior was sunk in a terrorist operation conducted by the French government. Hilda Murrell, the aunt of Rob Green, the retired UK Navy commander, who died in 1984, and the cover-up of her murder, the investigation is ongoing. Anna Mae Aquash, a Native American woman who was murdered in 1975 for opposing uranium mining at Pine Ridge, and a Russian anti-nuclear activist who was killed in 2007 in a protest outside a future uranium enrichment site. The industry would do well to pay attention. These voices are not from the fringe. We're not going anywhere, and we will not rest until this industry has been finally closed down.
Thank you,